Picture a room the size of a small church. Now fill it with fire. Not one fire. Not a fireplace you curl up next to with a cup of something warm. 6 hearths. 8 hearths on a feast day. All of them burning simultaneously. All of them fed with oaken ash and whatever dry wood the woodcutters managed to haul in before the rain came back. The heat in this room in summer will cook you as surely as anything in the pots above the flames. The ceiling is black with decades of smoke. The walls are black. Your skin, after 3 months here, has taken on a permanent grey tinge that no amount of scrubbing removes, because there is no amount of scrubbing. There is barely any water. Add the smell. God, the smell. Fat rendering from the carcass, turning on the great spit. Blood soaking into the rushes on the floor, which haven't been changed since last Tuesday, and weren't particularly fresh then. The vinegar they used to pickle the lamprey. The garlic. There is always garlic. Garlic hanging in. Bundles from every rafter. Garlic in every sauce. Garlic on the breath of every cook who's been working since before you woke up. The tang of raw offal. The sweetness of honey burning at the edge of a pan someone forgot to watch. And underneath all of it, the bass note. The thing you cannot escape no matter where you stand in this castle. The smell of too many people living too close together with no proper drainage and no concept of what a drain should even be. That's a medieval castle kitchen. That's where you live. Not in a room with a door that closes, not in a bed with sheets. You sleep on a pallet of straw near the bread ovens because the bread ovens stay warm through the night, and warmth is the difference between sleeping and not sleeping when the January wind comes through the gaps in the stones, and the whole castle seems to creak and shift like a ship in bad weather. You're 14 years old. You've been here since you were 11, and today is the worst day you've had in 3 years. Because this morning, before the sky was properly light, before you'd done more than splash cold water on your face and pick the sleep from your eyes, the head cook came through the kitchen door with the look on his face that every kitchen worker dreads. The look that means someone upstairs has made a decision that has absolutely nothing to do with what is possible in this kitchen, and now it is your problem. My lord's cousin arrives tonight, Thomas said, with 200 men. Let that settle for a moment. 200 men. Tonight. There are currently 8 rabbits, half a salted pig, some dried fish that might be turning, and approximately 14 loaves of yesterday's bread in this kitchen. The feast begins in 10 hours. Your name is William. William Attercroft, if anyone asks, which they rarely do, because scullions don't really have last names as far as the upper household is concerned. You're just William, or boy, or you there, or from Thomas. Specifically that useless sack of flour I inherited from the last cook. You're not useless. You're very much not useless, which is something you've had to prove every single day since you arrived here at Ashford Castle in the autumn of your 11th year, sent from the village of Attercroft, which is so small it doesn't appear on any map ever drawn, by a mother who loved you, and a father who was already dead of a fever, and an uncle who had too many mouths to feed and thought, correctly, that a castle would have more food than a half-acre farm in the Kentish hills. You arrived with a bundle of clothes that smelled of home, and a letter of recommendation from the village priest that called you diligent and obedient, and of sound Christian character. Thomas read it, looked you up and down, and put you to work scrubbing the hearths. You've been scrubbing hearths, washing pots, carrying water, hauling wood, feeding the fires, and doing every other piece of work that nobody else wants to do for 3 years. And somewhere in those 3 years, between the scrubbing and the hauling, you've learned things. You've learned how to tell when bread is proofed correctly just by pushing your finger into the dough and watching how it springs back. You've learned that the best sauce for roasted pork comes from reducing the pan drippings with a splash of verjuice, the sour juice of unripe grapes, and a handful of those garlic cloves that hang from the rafters. You've learned that you never ever put cold water into a hot cast iron pot, because the pot will crack, and then Thomas will crack you, metaphorically speaking. You've also learned the hierarchy of this kitchen, which is as rigid and clearly defined as the hierarchy of the castle above it, and which must be understood if you're going to understand what today means. At the top, Thomas, head cook, 43 years old, trained in the kitchens of a bishop's palace in Winchester before coming here 17 years ago. He's a large man, not fat but broad, built like someone who lifts heavy things all day, which he does. His hands are remarkable, thick-fingered, calloused, scarred from dozens of burns, but capable of pastry work so delicate it seems impossible. He has a temper that ignites faster than the kindling he's always throwing into the hearths, and an ego that fills the kitchen more completely than the smoke. He is also, grudgingly and against your will, the best cook you have ever seen work. Below Thomas, Walter, the second cook, a thin, nervous man who specialises in sauces and pottages, the thick spice stews that form the backbone of most meals. Walter has been here as long as Thomas, and has spent the entire time being told he's doing everything wrong. He has developed a specific tension in his jaw from clenching it. Then Edmund, the baker, who inhabits a separate and slightly calmer world over by the bread ovens. Edmund is 40 years old, but looks older, because flour does something to a man's face over the years. He doesn't much interact with the chaos of the main kitchen. He has his own small domain and his own rhythms, and the only time he loses his permanent mild calm is when someone opens the oven at the wrong moment. Then the roaster, Hugh. Hugh is 16 and has the best paying job in the kitchen that nobody wants, because Hugh's job is to stand in front of the main hearth for 6 to 8 hours at a stretch, turning the spit. The temperature directly in front of that fire can exceed what you'd experience standing next to a blacksmith's forge. Hugh is perpetually pink. His hair is singed at the front. He sweats in January. He once fell asleep on the job and woke up to find his eyebrows gone. Then you. And below you, technically, 2 boys younger than you whose names are Robert and Thomas the Lesser, to distinguish him from Thomas the Cook, who is simply Thomas, because Thomas is the one who decides what you're called. Robert is 9. Thomas the Lesser is 10. They carry things and wash things and get shouted at a lot. That's the kitchen staff. 8 people. To feed, on a normal day, somewhere between 60 and 80 castle residents, the lord's family and household, the knights and squires in his retinue, the servants of various grades, the chaplains and stewards and clerks, on a feast day, on a day like today, potentially twice that many. 200 men arriving tonight. You still haven't finished processing that. The kitchen of Ashford Castle is not in the main castle building. This is by design. Medieval kitchens are fire hazards of magnificent scale, and every lord who has ever watched his cook reduce a wing of his house to ash in the course of making dinner has arrived at the same conclusion. Put the kitchen somewhere separate. Put it in a building attached to the great hall by a covered passage, close enough that the food arrives hot, far enough that when it inevitably catches fire, the fire doesn't. Spread immediately to the place where the lord sleeps. The kitchen building is stone-walled and roughly square, maybe 30 feet by 30 feet. That sounds like a lot until you put 6 hearths in it, plus the bread ovens on the north wall, plus the long wooden preparation tables that run down the centre, plus all the hanging implements and the stacked pots and the barrels of salt and the sacks of flour and the bundles of herbs and the carcasses waiting to be butchered and the buckets of water that need constant replenishment and the fire, the constant, enormous, world-filling fire. The ceiling is high, maybe 15 feet at the peak, because heat rises and you need somewhere for it to go. There are 2 smoke vents cut into the roof. They are not adequate. They have never been adequate. On heavy days, the smoke hangs at eye level, and everyone in the kitchen coughs for hours. You've gotten so used to coughing in the morning that you no longer notice when you're doing it. There are windows, very small, set high in the walls, unglazed, just open holes with wooden shutters that do nothing against the cold in winter, but provide some theoretical function of ventilation. In summer, light comes through them. In the early morning in November, they are just rectangles of slightly less complete darkness. This morning you can see your breath. The fires are banked from overnight, not dead, but not burning properly, waiting for someone to feed them. That's your first job every morning. Get the fires going. Not because anyone told you specifically. This is simply what happens. You wake up, you feel the cold, you go to the hearths and start feeding them. You've done it so many times now that your hands know the sequence without your brain being involved. Clear the grey ash from yesterday. Check for live coals buried underneath. Lay the new kindling in a proper structure so air can circulate through it. Place the smaller wood pieces against the live coals. Blow gently until you get a catch, then add larger pieces as the flame grows, then stand back and let physics take over. The oak catches slowly but burns long and hot. That's the rule. Oak for the serious fires, the spit fire, the hearth that will burn all day. Ash burns faster and easier. Brushwood is for quick starts. You know this the way you know how to walk. While the fires catch, you start the water. The castle has a well in the inner courtyard, maybe 60 feet from the kitchen door. There are buckets, 8 of them made from iron-hooped wood, heavy when empty and nearly killing when full. You make 3 trips before Thomas arrives, which means 6 buckets of water sitting near the main preparation table and 2 more by the bread ovens where Edmund will need them for his dough. Your arms ache with the weight of the water. They ache every morning. The ache has become so familiar it no longer registers as pain, just as information. The information says, yes, this is your body, yes it is. Working, yes, it will continue to work for the foreseeable future. Thomas arrives at what you estimate is about an hour after dawn. You have no clock. Nobody in this kitchen has a clock. You tell time by light and bells and hunger, and the chapel bell rings prime at sunrise, which is your actual alarm, though usually you're already awake because the cold has made sleep impossible past a certain point. He looks at the fires, he looks at the water, he looks at you. The well bucket's leaking again, you say. I know. The water's brown. It's always brown. Browner than usual. Thomas looks at the bucket you're indicating. He leans in slightly. He doesn't say anything for a moment. Get it from the river then. Take Robert with you. That's another half-mile in the cold. But brown water has made people sick before in this kitchen, and a sick kitchen is a disaster that makes an unexpected feast look manageable. Yes, sir. And when you get back, Thomas says, setting down the wooden paddle he carries everywhere like a sceptre of office. I'll tell you what's happening today. He already told you. 200 men. Tonight. But you don't say that. You don't say much to Thomas in general. 3 years of observation have taught you that Thomas operates best when surrounded by people who listen and respond but don't initiate. He's not cruel, not exactly. He just has a very specific idea of how information should flow, and the direction is always downward. "Yes, sir," you say again, and go to find Robert. The river is a tributary of the Medway, running through the bottom of the valley below the castle. The path down to it is muddy in autumn and winter, which means November, which means today, which means you and Robert make your way down a hillside that is more or less a controlled fall, carrying empty buckets that bang against your legs. Robert is 9 years old and has the kind of constant cold that children get in this century. He's had it for 3 months. It may never go away. It is not killing him, but it is certainly making him unpleasant to be near. He sniffles rhythmically. You've started timing conversations around the sniffles. "Is it true?" he asks. Sniffle. Is what true? "The Lord's cousin, coming tonight." That's what Thomas said. 200 men. 200 men. Robert thinks about this. He's still at the stage of life where very large numbers are genuinely impressive rather than terrifying. "That's a lot," he says. "Yes." "Will there be extra bread?" "There'll be extra everything, that's the problem." "Where's the extra coming from?" You reach the riverbank. The water is clear here, well upstream from the castle, running cold and fast over grey stones. You can see your reflection, sort of, a thin face, dark eyes, hair that you cut yourself every few months with a knife, without a mirror, which explains why it never quite lies flat on the right side. "I don't know yet," you tell him. "We'll find out when we get back." You fill the buckets. Your hands go numb almost immediately. The water is cold enough to make your fingers ache right up into the wrists, that specific cold that makes you think about how bones feel, how they're inside your skin right now doing structural work, and how much more comfortable they'd be somewhere else. You carry the buckets back up the hill. By the time you reach the kitchen, feeling has mostly returned to your hands, which is not entirely a blessing because returning feeling brings with it the awareness of everything you've scraped, cut and burned over the past week. The back of your left hand has a burn from 3 days ago, a long stripe from where you caught the edge of a pot you didn't realise was above the fire. It's not serious. Burns are normal. Everyone in this kitchen has burns. Thomas has burns layered over burns going back 17 years. A map of every mistake and near miss written in scar tissue on his forearms. You set the buckets down. Thomas is already at the preparation table with Walter and Edmund. A rare alliance. The three of them rarely stand in the same space without someone's territory being encroached upon, but today the territory problem has been temporarily suspended by a larger problem, which is the physics of feeding 200 extra men in 10 hours. "Right," Thomas says when you and Robert are settled. "Here's what we know." What Thomas knows is this. Lord Geoffrey's cousin, Sir Robert Morley, not Robert the Scullion, a different, significantly more powerful Robert, is returning from the coast. He's been there on some business connected to the King's ongoing preparations for what everyone is politely not calling a war with France, though it is absolutely a war with France, or is about to be. He has with him the better part of 200 knights and men-at-arms, many of them with horses, all of them with the specific entitlement of men who have been on the road for 3 days, and are expecting the hospitality of a household that has had 3 weeks' notice of their arrival. The castle received no notice whatsoever. A rider came in at midnight. The steward came down to the kitchen at dawn. The steward's problem, Thomas says, with a contempt for the steward that is long-standing and mutual, is that he thinks food happens by wishing for it. He's up there right now telling the Lord that it can be done. He pauses. It can be done, but not the way he thinks it can be done. What Thomas has, the 8 rabbits, which are fine for an ordinary supper but comically inadequate for this, the half pig, salt preserved, which is good, dried fish, a barrel of it, which is serviceable, a full sack of dried peas, flour for bread, honey 2 pots, dried herbs in abundance, rosemary, sage, thyme, a small barrel of verjuice, 3 rounds of hard cheese, and the stores that are always kept as emergency reserves, a small cask of salt cod, dried apples, dried beans. What he needs, meat, fresh meat ideally, enough to fill the great hall tonight. The river, Edmund suggests. The river's fished out this time of year, Walter says. The home farm, Thomas says. I've already sent Hugh to tell them we need cattle, whatever they can spare, and the chaplain's man is going to the village to buy whatever they have. Chickens, geese, whatever's moving, we pay Lord's price. He looks at each of them. Everything we have goes into this. Everything. We cook all day. We don't stop for anything that isn't an emergency. He looks at you specifically. William, you're on fires today. All day. Every fire in this kitchen stays hot. You feed them, you bank them, you watch them. You don't do anything else unless I tell you. Yes, sir. Robert, you carry. Wherever Walter points, you carry. Whatever Walter needs, you get. Robert nods, sniffling. Edmund. Thomas doesn't tell Edmund what to do in the same voice he uses for everyone else, because Edmund is a specialist. How much bread can you make today? 8 batches, Edmund says after a moment of internal calculation that you can actually watch happening on his face. Given the flour we have, 8 large batches, that's maybe 60 loaves. That's not enough. I know it's not enough. A silence. We'll have to use manshed, Edmund says, and trenchers if we run out. They won't complain about trenchers. Trenchers are thick slabs of dense bread that serve as both plate and food. You pile meat and sauce on top of them and eat both. They're perfectly functional. But serving trenchers instead of proper bread rolls is the kind of thing that gets noticed by the class of people who are about to arrive. Make them fancy trenchers, Thomas says, which is not really a thing, but Edmund understands him to mean, do what you can with what you have. What about spices? Walter asks. Thomas goes to the locked chest in the corner. This is the spice chest. Thomas has the key on a cord around his neck. He opens it and you can smell, even from across the kitchen, the concentrated richness of its contents. The black pepper, the ginger, the cinnamon, the cloves. These spices have come from places you will never see, across distances you can barely imagine, from markets in Alexandria and Venice, and through the hands of a dozen different merchants, and they have ended up here in a castle in Kent in a locked chest that Thomas treats with the reverence a priest gives the sacrament. He looks at what's in there. He does the calculation. He closes the chest. We use the pepper and ginger freely, the cloves and cinnamon only on the food that goes to the high table. This is also a class decision. The high table, the lord and his family and the most important guests, gets the expensive spices. The lower tables get the cheaper ones. This is not considered a slight. This is considered the natural order of things. Right, Thomas says, closing the chest and locking it again. Let's start. The cattle arrive from the home farm, about an hour later. 3 animals, large ones. The farm sent their best because Lord's price is real money and the farmer isn't stupid. The slaughter happens in the small yard beside the kitchen building, and it falls to Thomas and the farm's man to do it properly. But someone has to deal with the aftermath, and the aftermath is blood and heat, and the start of a process that will take an animal standing in a field this morning and put it on a table tonight. You've watched this enough times to stop flinching, though flinching stopped being the response after the first month. What replaced it is something more like attention, professional attention. The cow goes down fast when it's done right, faster than most people who haven't seen it expect. There's a moment, and this sounds strange, but it's true. There's a moment that you recognize now, something in the animal's eyes that changes, and then it's no longer an animal in the way that it was an animal, and what happens after, that is just work. The skinning takes time. The gutting takes time. Everything that can't be used, and very little can't be used, goes to a bucket that the pigs will get later. The offal goes into another bucket, moving to the kitchen immediately because it needs to be used first. It won't keep. The liver, the kidneys, the heart. Thomas will use all of it. Your job in this process is to receive and carry. The butcher works. You take what the butcher passes you and move it inside. The joints of meat, heavy and warm, going onto the main preparation table. The bones, which will go into the largest pot for stock. The fat trimmed and set aside. The weight of it is remarkable. A full quarter of a cow, the hind quarter, weighs something you'd struggle to hold for more than a few minutes. You manage it by bracing it against your body, letting the weight distribute across your hips rather than carrying it in your arms, a technique you figured out through necessity and pain. Your hands are greasy with it. The smell is copper and salt and something warm and alive that no longer has anything alive in it. You carry 4 loads. By the 4th one, your shoulders are burning with effort. Inside, Thomas has already started on the first load. His knife moves with a speed and confidence that still surprises you after 3 years. He doesn't look at what his hands are doing, not exactly. His eyes are moving around the kitchen, tracking the fires, watching Robert, calculating, but the knife never stops. Stir that, he says, without pointing at anything specific, because there's only one thing on the fire that needs stirring right now. The pottage pot that Walter started an hour ago, and everyone in the kitchen knows what stir that means. You stir that. Managing fires sounds simple. People manage fires for thousands of years before there was anything more sophisticated available. How complicated can it be? The answer is very. The fires in this kitchen are not the same fire. They have distinct purposes, distinct fuel requirements, distinct temperatures, and they must be maintained at those temperatures simultaneously while everything else is happening. The spit fire, the largest hearth, the one in the centre of the north wall, needs to burn hot and steady. The animal on the spit, turning on a wheel mechanism operated by a weight and pulley system, which was installed 3 years before you arrived and is considered very modern, needs constant, even heat. Too hot and the outside chars before the inside is cooked. Too cool and you're serving raw meat which will kill someone. The right temperature is a judgment you make by holding your hand near the fire, not in the fire, near it, and counting how many seconds you can keep it there. Thomas says you can cook anything if you understand your fire. He's right. The bread oven hearth is different. Edmund's oven is fired separately, a stone chamber that's heated with wood, and then the wood is raked out and the heat of the stone itself does the baking. You need to bring it to the right temperature, hot enough that a handful of flour thrown against the back wall ignites immediately, and then clear it fast and get the bread in. The pottage hearths burn lower. Long, steady, patient fires that need feeding regularly but not urgently. You can go 10 minutes without attending to them in a way that you can't go 10 minutes without attending to the spit fire. The small hearths, used for sauces and the quicker work, are the ones that get away from you if you're not careful. A sauce needs less heat than it looks like it needs. The moment you're not watching, the bottom burns, and a burnt sauce in medieval cooking is not a problem you solve by adding something to fix it. You throw it out and start again, and you do not tell Thomas how it happened unless he specifically asks, and even then you consider your options carefully. Today you have all of these going simultaneously. You move between them, feed this one, check that one, adjust the damper on the third, stir the coals on the fourth. You develop a circuit, a route through the kitchen that lets you check each fire in a logical sequence that covers all of them in about 4 minutes. Then you start the circuit again. The heat builds as the morning progresses. By the time 2 hours have passed, the kitchen is warm enough to work in shirt sleeves, which is meaningful in November. By mid-morning, when all the preparation is in full swing, it's hot in a way that soaks your clothes through and turns every surface you touch damp. You drink water constantly. If you don't drink enough water in this kitchen, your body starts making bad decisions. You get dizzy. Your hands start shaking in a way that makes managing the fires dangerous. Thomas told you this on your first week. Drink water. More water than you think you need. The fires will steal the water from your body if you let them, so you drink. The river water, which you've boiled this morning out of habit and caution, cooling in a clay pot near the smaller hearths. It tastes slightly of the river, which tastes slightly of the valley, which tastes slightly of everything that's ever run into it. Not bad, actually. You've had worse. The kitchen is below, the great hall is above. There is a covered passageway between them, stone-flagged, slightly downhill from the kitchen to the hall, which means the food travels uphill, and by the time it arrives it's slightly cooler than it left. This is one of the universal problems of castle kitchens in this century, and the solution is mostly to cook everything a little hotter than it needs to be, and accept that some warmth will be lost in transit. You've been in the Great Hall twice in 3 years, both times on your own time, sneaking through during the quiet of early morning just to see it. It's a different world, not a different building, literally a different world in the way that rooms can contain entirely different atmospheres, different air, different weight. The Great Hall at Ashford is maybe 50 feet long and 30 feet wide, with a ceiling that soars up to exposed oak beams 40 feet overhead. The walls are plastered and painted. Scenes from what you think is a biblical story on the east wall, hunting scenes on the west. The floor is stone, covered in rushes that smell of herbs when you walk on them because someone, somewhere in the domestic hierarchy above you, sprinkles herbs on the rushes when they're fresh. The high table sits on a raised dais at the far end. That's where Lord Geoffrey sits. That's where, tonight, Sir Robert Morley will sit. The other tables run the length of the hall, lower for the lesser guests. In the centre of the hall is a fireplace, a central hearth, whose smoke rises to the ceiling and out through a louvre in the roof. Not as efficient as the kitchen hearths. Permanent smoke haze in the upper third of the hall. Atmospheric, if you're the sort of person who finds that kind of thing atmospheric. You're not Lord Geoffrey. You're not Sir Robert Morley. You will not eat in the Great Hall tonight. The food you're going to spend all day making will travel up that passageway, be presented on silver and pewter dishes by the steward's men who will take credit for everything that happened below, and be consumed by people who will not think about who made it. This is fine. This is normal. This is the way things work. But you think about it sometimes, in the quiet moments between fire feeding. You think about the chain of it. The cattle in the field this morning, the blood in the slaughter yard, the wood you've been splitting and hauling since before dawn, the specific knowledge of temperatures and spices and timing that Thomas has spent 17 years accumulating. All of it invisible by the time it reaches the table. Invisible, but necessary. You hold on to that. You have watched Thomas cook for 3 years. This means you have watched a master craftsman at work for 3 years, which is more than most people ever get in this century, where knowledge passes through demonstration and observation and repetition rather than through books. Thomas can't read. Most people can't read. What Thomas knows lives in his hands and his nose and the back of his throat. Where he holds flavour memories the way other people hold words. Today, with the pressure on and the kitchen running at full speed, you see him at his best. He's butchering the second quarter of beef and talking to Walter at the same time, directing the sauce while his hands do entirely different work. More pepper, not that much, more verjuice. Walter, more verjuice. The sauce should bite, it shouldn't stab. Walter adds verjuice with the caution of a man who's been told too much 1,000 times and has overcorrected into a permanent state of insufficient seasoning. More, Thomas says. He doesn't look up from the meat. The knife comes down in a rhythm that you've come to find actually beautiful in the way that efficient, practiced motion is beautiful. No wasted movement. The joint breaks down into sections you can see are exactly the right size for the task. Large enough to be impressive on the platter, small enough to cook through before the feast. He's calculating cooking time in his head, adjusting as he goes. The ribs go on first, he tells you, because you're close, and because Thomas does this. He narrates while he works, which you think might be how he learned, someone narrating to him, and now he does it automatically. Ribs take the longest, 3 hours minimum on a proper fire, you understand why. More mass, you say, takes longer to heat through, he grunts, which is Thomas's version of approval. The loin goes on last. You can spoil a loin with too much heat. You want it cooked through but not tough. The fat should run clear, not crisp. He deposits the rib section on the rack. Above the spitfire, the immediate sizzle fills the kitchen with a smell that is one of the better smells in the world. Fat meeting fire. The automatic response in your body to that smell is something fundamental, some evolutionary thing that knows this means food, means survival, means the long winter might be managed after all. How do you know when the loin's right, you ask? Thomas pauses, just briefly. This is the kind of question he doesn't always get from you, because usually you're doing and watching, not asking. He sets down the knife. He picks up the piece of loin he's just separated and holds it in his hands, turning it. Your hand, he says. Relax your hand. Like this. He demonstrates, fingers loose, palm flat. Press the meat like this. He shows you. Feels like that. That's raw. He adjusts. Like this. That's medium. That's what you want for beef. Like that. He pauses. Practice on your own hand. Press the fat pad at the base of your thumb when your hand's relaxed. That's rare. Press it when you make a fist. That's well done. Somewhere in between is where you want to be. You try it on your hand, relaxed. Fist. The middle. Huh? You say. Thomas picks up the knife again. 3 years I've been waiting for you to start asking questions, he says. Better late than never. Edmund's domain is the quietest corner of the kitchen, which doesn't mean it's quiet. The bread ovens are their own kind of loud, with the roaring of the fire inside the stone chamber and the constant soft thud of dough being worked on the table. But Edmund operates at a different tempo than the rest of the kitchen. He's methodical. Where Thomas is reactive, brilliant and loud, Edmund is patient, precise and contained. He's on his third batch of dough by mid-morning. The flour sits in a wooden trough, not a bowl, a trough, because the quantities are too large for anything smaller. He works the dough with his forearms as much as his hands, leaning his full weight into it, and the dough resists him with a living kind of stubbornness, pushing back, trying to spring away, and he presses it down and folds it over and presses it down again. His forearms are dusted white up to the elbows. The fine flour has gotten into the creases of his knuckles and makes them look ashy, like an old man's hands. How long, you ask, passing behind him to get to the woodpile. This batch, another hour until it's proved. Then the oven's ready, 40 minutes. He glances at the oven. The fire needs more wood. You load the bread oven fire. The heat from the opening hits your face like opening a door to somewhere else, somewhere the weather has completely different rules. You step back automatically, feed the wood in at arm's length. "Thank you," Edmund says, which is something Thomas never says. Edmund has always been generous with thanks. It costs him nothing, and it makes Robert and Thomas the Lesser work harder for him than they do for anyone else in the kitchen, which is probably why he does it. The bread dough, when it's proved correctly, has a specific texture and a specific smell. It smells alive, which is exactly what it is. The yeast in it is alive, has been alive since Edmund started the starter culture that he feeds daily. A blob of fermenting dough he's been maintaining for longer than you've been here. He claims it's the same starter his master gave him, which came from his master before that. A chain of living culture going back decades. This morning's bread will be slightly different from yesterday's, because the temperature in the kitchen is different, and the wheat flour is from a different part of the year's harvest. Bread is never exactly the same twice. Edmund knows this the way you know the fires, by feel, by nose, by the specific way the dough responds under his hands. Tighter today, he says to himself mostly. Cold weather makes it tight. He adjusts. More water, more time. The dough relaxes under his insistence. You watch for a moment, then go back to your fires. Pottage is the word that covers a vast range of things, from thin vegetable soup to thick stews that are almost solid. What Walter is making today is the latter. A blancmange, a thick dish of chicken, rice, almond milk and sugar, white and smooth and sweet, which sounds delicate and is in fact an enormous amount of work. And a civet, which is a brown sauce of onions and wine and spices, dark and complex for the beef. The chickens arrived with the second delivery from the village, 12 of them. Leave, which meant more time in the slaughter yard, which meant more carrying on your part, which you're beginning to accept as your permanent condition in this life. Walter works with a focused anxiety that is his natural state. He stirs things too much. Thomas has told him this. Walter knows he stirs things too much and is unable to stop. He stirs the almond milk, already more stirring than it needs, just with a wooden spoon that he turns in tight circles, as if speed will compensate for the amount of time this preparation takes. The almond milk is made from ground almonds soaked in water, pressed through linen until all the white liquid runs out, and what's left in the cloth is dry paste. This takes time and arm strength. You did the pressing earlier this morning, the cloth twisted tight, the liquid dripping into the bowl beneath. Your hands smell of almonds now. This is the best your hands have smelled in weeks. The recipe for blancmange in this kitchen is not written down. It exists in Walter's memory, passed to him from Thomas, passed to Thomas from his master, and so on back through however many kitchens. The reese goes in first, half-cooked in water, then transferred to the almond milk to finish. The chicken, already simmered until the meat falls from the bones, goes in next, shredded fine. Then the spices, ginger, and a careful, measured pinch of the precious cloves from Thomas's chest. Then sugar, the white sugar that costs more per pound than anything else on that preparation table. Sugar in this century is medicine as much as food. The physicians believe it has purifying properties. It costs so much that serving it openly, in a dish, at table, is a statement. It says, "This household has money. This lord can afford to give his guests sweetness. You are not supposed to eat the sugar. It goes in the pot, measured carefully, and Thomas knows how much was in the chest, and will know if any is missing. You have never taken any sugar. This is either principled or purely practical, since the consequences of Thomas discovering missing sugar would be severe. You are willing to believe it's principled. The sauce for the beef is different work, louder and more demanding. Onions, a barrel of them from the storeroom, need to be peeled and chopped, which falls to Thomas the Lesser, who spends 40 minutes weeping at the preparation table in a way that is both functional and slightly pathetic. The onions go into a pot with rendered fat, and the kitchen fills with the sound and smell of them browning, that specific sizzle that turns to a kind of murmuring as they soften. Wine, a cask of the cheaper wine that the castle uses for cooking, sour and rough, goes in next. Then the spices, then it reduces on the back hearth for an hour until it's thick and dark and complex. You check on it every circuit. The smell of it changes as the hour passes. First the raw wine, sharp and aggressive, then the onion sweetness coming through as they caramelize, then the spice warming through the liquid, the pepper's heat, the ginger's prickle, then the whole thing coming together into something that is recognizably a sauce, something that will transform plain roasted beef into something worth serving to knights. You don't get to taste it. Not yet. But you know what it's going to taste like because you've smelled enough of Thomas's sauces to understand where they're going before they arrive. Hugh has been in front of the Spitfire for 4 hours. Let me tell you about Hugh's job. The spit is a long iron rod, maybe 6 feet in length, with pointed ends that go through the meat and rest in brackets on either side of the hearth. The meat, the ribs right now, later the whole chickens, later the joints of loin, hang suspended above the coals turning. The turning is essential. Without it, one side chars while the other stays raw. With it, the heat distributes evenly and the fat bastes the meat as it runs down one side, reaches the bottom, and runs down the other. The turning mechanism at Ashford is a system of cords attached to a weight that drops slowly through the height of the kitchen. As the weight descends, the cord turns the spit. When the weight reaches the bottom, someone has to reset it. This is the primary job, resetting the mechanism, and it happens every 20 minutes or so. But that's not actually Hugh's job. Hugh's job is to stand there and watch, to catch any meat that starts to fall off the rod, to add or remove coals based on whether the fire is burning too hot or too cool, to baste the meat periodically. There is a long-handled ladle for this. The drippings caught in a pan beneath the spit and ladled back up over the top of the meat. To respond to Thomas when Thomas comes to check on the progress of the roasting. The temperature in front of that fire, as I said, is remarkable. When you pass behind Hugh now, heading to the woodpile, you can feel the heat radiating from him, as if he himself is a source of warmth. His face is flushed and damp, his hair hanging in damp strings around his forehead, his shirt dark with sweat through the back. "All right," you say. "Hot," he says. He says this every time. It's not a complaint, just an observation, a confirmation that conditions are as expected. "The ribs are nearly there," he adds. "Tell Thomas, maybe another 30 minutes. You tell Thomas." Thomas comes to look. He stands beside Hugh for a moment, close enough to the fire that you wince on his behalf, examining the surface of the meat, the colour of the fat, the way the juices are running. He reaches out and presses a finger against the flesh. The same test he showed you earlier, feeling for the resistance that tells you the interior temperature, and nods once. 30 minutes, he confirms, and goes back to the table. Hugh takes a long drink of water. His hands, holding the ladle, have the particular trembling steadiness of muscles pushed hard for a long time. Not shaking, but not perfectly still either. Somewhere in between. He's been doing this job for 2 years. He'll do it for another year at least before there's any chance of moving somewhere else in the kitchen hierarchy. Does it get easier, you ask? Quietly, so Thomas won't hear and interpret it as complaining. Hugh considers the question with genuine seriousness. "Your body gets used to the heat," he says. "First month I thought I'd die. Now I just sweat a lot." He pauses. "The hard part's the standing, not the heat, the standing." He shifts his weight from one foot to the other, demonstrating. Even that small adjustment seems to offer some relief. 2 more hours, he says, more to himself than you. Maybe 3. Then the loin goes on and then it's nearly done. You go back to your fires. Around midday, you can tell because the light from the small windows changes angle, the slant of it shifting across the floor, and because your stomach is a more reliable clock than any other instrument in the kitchen, Thomas begins to prepare the subtleties. Subtleties are sugar sculptures. They arrive at the end of courses, elaborate confections made from sugar paste and almond paste, shaped into animals or castles or religious scenes. They are simultaneously food and decoration, and the message they send is expense. Sheer, unambiguous expense. This is what we can afford to do with our sugar. This is also the one part of the kitchen's work that is closest to art, which is probably why Thomas does it himself, and why he does it at the end of the main preparation rather than the beginning. It requires a specific kind of focused calm that's hard to achieve when the rest of the kitchen is at full speed. He clears himself a space at the end of the preparation table, sets out the materials, the sugar paste, sticky and pliable, the almond paste, dense and pale, the small wooden tools for modelling, the moulds carved from wood that live in a box in the locked cabinet. He washes his hands twice, carefully, which is something he doesn't always do, and dries them on a clean cloth. You watch from across the kitchen while you tend the fires. He works with the same focused efficiency he brings to the butchering, but slower, more deliberate. His big hands, which seem designed for chopping and stirring and lifting heavy pots, move with remarkable delicacy around the paste. He's making swans, 3 of them. White sugar swans with articulated wings, arching necks, the details of feathers pressed in with the tip of a small bone tool. They take about 20 minutes each. When they're done, he sets them on a flat board near the back of the table, away from the heat to firm up. He looks at them for a moment, just a moment, and then he goes back to the pottage. You don't say anything. There's nothing to say. They're beautiful, the swans, in the way that something made with real skill is beautiful, quietly and without any drama. It happens in the early afternoon, when the kitchen is at maximum speed, and the noise is at its peak and everyone's attention is fractured across a dozen simultaneous tasks. Walter is moving a pot. The pot is the largest cast iron vessel in the kitchen, 20 gallons roughly, full of the pottage that's been cooking since morning. It needs to move from the large hearth where it's been cooking to the smaller one because Thomas needs the large hearth for the final preparations on the loin joint, and the pottage just needs to stay warm now. The pot has handles, iron handles thick enough to grip, designed to be used with heavy padded cloths because the iron is as hot as the fire that's been under it for 6 hours. Walter uses the padded cloths. He lifts the pot. He takes 3 steps toward the smaller hearth. His foot catches on a bundle of rushes that have worked loose from the floor covering and curled up at the edge of the table. He doesn't fall. He doesn't drop the pot. He stumbles, catches himself, and in catching himself his grip shifts and the pot tilts, and about 2 gallons of near-boiling pottage sloshes over the left handle and across Walter's left hand and forearm. The sound he makes is not a scream. It's a specific, short, sharp sound that you associate with very bad pain, more like someone being hit than someone burning, and then the pot goes down on the smaller hearth with a clang that echoes in the stone kitchen, and Walter is standing there with his arm held out from his body, looking at it, not saying anything. You are across the kitchen in about 4 steps. The burn is bad. Not catastrophic. The cloth took some of it, but bad enough that the skin on his forearm is already starting to blister in the 3 or 4 places where the pottage made direct contact. His hand is worse, red and swelling, the skin looking tighter than it should. Cold water, you say. Now. This is something you know. You've burned yourself enough times, and Edmund burned his hand badly 2 summers ago, and you watched what Thomas did, and Thomas moved fast and got cold water on it immediately, which is the difference between a bad burn and a worse burn. Walter lets you guide his hand into the bucket of river water. His face has gone grey. Thomas is there in seconds. He looks at the hand, the arm. He looks at Walter's face. He makes the calculation. Not a calculation with numbers, a calculation with experience, and says, "Edmund, come here." Edmund comes over, still floury. "Can you keep the pottage going?" Edmund looks at the pot, assessing. "Yes." "Then Walter's done for today. Get him to the infirmary." He looks at Walter. "You did well not to drop it." Walter, who is still making the face that says he is managing serious pain through sheer effort of will, nods slightly. "The pottage needs more ginger," he says. "I didn't add the last of it yet." "I'll add the ginger," Thomas says. "Go." And then Walter is gone, led by Thomas the Lesser to the castle infirmary, which is a room near the chapel where a woman named Agnes tends to the medical needs of the household, with the same combination of plant knowledge and prayer that serves as medicine in this century. The kitchen is quieter for about 10 seconds. Then Thomas turns around and says, "Back to work," and the kitchen comes back to speed. But the dynamic has changed. You can feel it. There are now effectively 6 people in the kitchen instead of 7, with Edmund covering Walter's work as best he can while also managing his bread, and with Thomas doing 3 things at once instead of 2, and with you covering the fires plus being available for whatever else needs doing. The slack that Walter occupied is now distributed, invisible, additional weight on everyone's shoulders. This is how kitchens fail. Not dramatically, incrementally. You do your circuit, check the spitfire, check the pottage, check the bread oven temperature, check the sauce on the back hearth, check the spitfire again, because it always needs checking. William, Thomas doesn't look up from the loin joint he's scoring. What's the pottage doing? You go and look. Starting to catch on the bottom, stir it. Already stirring it. Then add water, half a cup, and the ginger, it's on the table, the small jar. You add water. You find the ginger jar. The ginger is dried, ground to a pale powder that smells clean and sharp, and you measure out what you judge to be the right amount. Thomas said the last of it, and the jar is half full, so you take half and stir it in. The smell of the pottage changes immediately, the warm spice rising through the steam. Done, you report. Good. He pauses. Taste it. You use the long-handled tasting spoon, the one that lives hooked to the edge of the main hearth, and take a small amount and taste it. It's good. Rich and sweet and spiced. The almond milk giving it a silkiness you don't associate with pottage in general. But it needs something. You think about it. Needs salt, you say. How much? Not much. Pinch. Then add a pinch. You add a pinch. Taste again. Better. Thomas comes over. Takes his own taste. He doesn't look at you when he does it because he's looking at the pottage, tasting it, evaluating it. A pause. Another pinch, he says. You add another pinch. He tastes again, nods. Then he does look at you briefly, and there's something in his expression that you've only seen a few times in 3 years. Something not quite like approval. Something earlier than approval, like the acknowledgement that approval might eventually be possible. Not bad, he says, and goes back to the loin. You stand there for a moment, holding the tasting spoon, and feel something warm in your chest that has nothing to do with the fire. Late afternoon. The kitchen is several hours into its peak operation, and everyone in it is running on something below their best and above exhaustion, in that particular zone where your body has resigned itself to the work and your mind has quieted down from the morning's urgency into something more mechanical. The fires are constant. You've fed them so many times today that the motion is a kind of reflex now. Reach for the wood, judge the size, place it at the angle that will burn most efficiently, step back, move on. Your left shoulder is developing a specific ache from the wood handling, a dull burn in the muscle that connects the shoulder to the neck. You know this one. It'll be there tomorrow. You'll sleep on the right side tonight. The smell of the kitchen has shifted through the day in layers, the way weather systems move through a valley. Morning was cold water and ash and fresh blood. Midday was the deep, rich smell of everything cooking simultaneously, the fat and the spice and the yeast. Now, in the late afternoon, it's the smell of completion, the slightly too much smell of food that has been cooking for hours, the heaviness of it. You haven't eaten since the bread and small beer at dawn. Nobody has, except for the small tastes that are part of the work. The kitchen doesn't stop for a meal. The kitchen is a meal all day, and the people making it eat it later, after the feast, when the lords and knights have finished, and whatever remains comes back down the passage. This is the system. Your stomach has progressed through the stages of hunger. The early hollow feeling, the sharp pangs around midday, the strange post-midday period where hunger becomes more conceptual than physical, your body having accepted that it will not be immediately resolved, settling into a kind of resigned patience. Now, in the late afternoon, the smell of the roasting meat is enough to make you aware of every part of your digestive system in sequence. Robert keeps looking at the food. Don't, you tell him. I'm not doing anything. You're looking. Looking's allowed. It is allowed, technically. You look at it too. Everyone in the kitchen looks at it. Looking is how you manage the distance between where you are and where the food is going. Hugh has finished his spit duty and been replaced, briefly, mercifully, by Thomas himself, who took over so Hugh could go outside and cool down. Hugh came back 15 minutes later, pink fading to normal, and took over again, because there was no one else to do it. The loin is nearly done. Thomas stands beside Hugh and checks the meat. Every 5 minutes with his finger test, and each time he checks you can see the small adjustment of his expression that says not yet, getting closer almost. Now, Hugh asks, another 10 minutes. You said 10 minutes 10 minutes ago, and now I'm saying it again. 10 minutes. Hugh nods and turns the spit. While the kitchen has been managing its particular emergency, the rest of the castle has been managing its own version. You got glimpses of it through the day. Servants crossing the courtyard with things. The steward appearing at the kitchen door twice to ask questions that revealed he had no idea what cooking involved. The sound of activity from the great hall and the guest chambers. 200 men don't just need feeding. They need sleeping. They need their horses stabled and fed. They need their weapons stored. They need the arrangements of courtesy that medieval households run on, the specific gestures of welcome and precedence that signal to arriving, nights that they are honoured guests and not prisoners. None of this is your problem. This is a comfort. Your world is bounded by the kitchen walls and the woodpile outside and the river when you need clean water. You don't have to worry about whether there's enough straw for the horses or whether the guest chambers have been properly aired. You have one job, or rather many jobs that constitute one purpose, and that purpose is that there is food when the feast begins. The pantler arrived around midday to take stock of what the kitchen would be sending up. The pantler is the person responsible for bread, and his domain overlaps with Edmund's at the point where the bread leaves the kitchen. He's a neat, precise man named Adam, who has a notebook and writes things in it and says a lot when looking at the tallies. 60 loaves, Edmund told him. Adam said. It's 60 or nothing. That's what I can make today. Plus the trenchers. More writing. The high table will notice. The high table can notice. There's nothing I can do about the flour we don't have. Adam wrote something else. Is there any of the good manchet? 2 dozen rolls, white flour. Those go to the high table only, obviously. This negotiation, this very specific professional exchange between 2 specialists about exactly who gets what kind of bread, is one of the things you find fascinating about the castle's domestic world. Everyone in it is running a small fiefdom, with their own specialised knowledge, their own territory, their own pride in what they do. The kitchen is one kingdom, the pantry is another. The buttery, where the butler manages the wine and ale, is a third. They cooperate out of necessity and compete out of professional dignity. The butler, meanwhile, has been up and down the passage 3 times about the wine. The castle's wine cellar is apparently not stocked for 200 guests. The butler's face when he mentioned this suggested feelings that politeness prevented him from expressing fully. Not our problem, Thomas said, when you mentioned it. I know. The wine is his problem, the food is ours. The division of labour in a medieval castle is one of its genuinely interesting features. The hierarchy is strict and the territories are defended with the energy that people put into things when their entire identity is built around what they do. Thomas is the head cook. He does not pour wine. If you asked him to pour wine, he would probably look at you for a long time without speaking. You carry wood, you tend fires, you carry water. You've done these things so many times that they are simply the shape of your day. Not separate tasks, but one continuous task that is the act of keeping this kitchen operational. An hour before the feast is scheduled to begin, the kitchen undergoes a transformation. The long-form cooking is mostly done. The beef on the spit is resting, the pottage is at temperature, and needs only maintenance. The bread is out of the ovens and cooling on racks. What remains is the final assembly, the plating, the presentation, the moment when all the components of the feast become a feast. This is where Thomas's real artistry shows. He moves around the preparation table with a speed and purpose that makes everyone else in the kitchen look slower by comparison, not because they're working less hard, but because Thomas has a clarity of purpose in these moments that organises the space around him. He knows exactly what goes on each platter, exactly how it should look, exactly what order the dishes should arrive in the hall. The pottage goes first. In the silver bowl. Where's the silver bowl? The silver bowl is in the pantry, supposedly. It comes back to the kitchen with the pantler, who carries it as if it's more valuable than anything in the kitchen, which it probably is. Thomas ladles the Blant's manger into it with careful precision, filling it to the right, level, wiping the rim with a clean cloth. He takes 2 of the white manchi rolls from Edmund's rack and places them beside it on the board. "Good," he says. "Next, the beef." The beef comes off the spit. Hugh takes it down with the proper tools, the hooks and the cradle, and rests it on the carving board. It's magnificent in the way that well-roasted beef is magnificent. The exterior brown and crusted, the fat rendered to a translucent gold, the smell so concentrated and rich that you can feel it at the back of your throat. Thomas carves it. Long, smooth strokes, the knife going through with no resistance where it should go through, and stopping where it should stop. The slices come away in perfect thick rounds, fanning out on the platter. He ladles the civet, the dark onion sauce, from the pot on the back hearth, and it flows over the meat with a darkness and complexity that is beautiful, actually beautiful. The swans go on. Thomas places them at the corners of the presentation platter with the same care he made them with. They've hardened nicely. They look very good. "Salt the beef before it goes up," Thomas tells Robert. And Robert, understanding this is a real responsibility, goes to the salt cellar and measures out a careful pinch and applies it with the appropriate seriousness. The chickens come off the smaller hearth, roasted, glazed with honey and spice in the last 20 minutes of cooking, their skin caramel brown and crackling crisp. They go on platters with roasted onions and herbs. The salt fish, this was your last-minute solution for the numbers, salt cod soaked overnight and then poached in ale with herbs, is arranged with sliced cheese and the remaining trenchers for the lower tables. Edmund is sending down the bread in batches. The loaves are round and golden, the good ones, with a gloss from the egg wash he brushed on before the final bake. He picks up each one and taps its underside, listening for the hollow sound that means it's done through, before he hands it to the pantler's boy. You're doing everything. Fires, carrying, checking, tasting when asked, stirring when needed, picking up whatever needs doing in the spaces between, the endless small tasks that keep the machinery of a feast operating. Your hands have stopped hurting individually and started hurting collectively, one unified ache from fingertips to elbows. Your feet are doing something similar. The back of your neck, where you've been leaning over the fires all day, is tight with heat. You don't stop. "The sweets?" Thomas asks. "Ready, Astul," you tell him. The honeyed pastries that Edmund made in the brief window between bread batches, small dense things sweetened with honey and dried apple, dusted with a powder of ginger. They're on a tray near the back wall, covered with a cloth. Thomas looks at them, lifts the cloth, looks. "Fine," he says, which from Thomas is something close to enthusiastic praise, and then the steward's men come down the passage to carry the first courses up to the great hall, and the feast begins. You can hear the feast from the kitchen, not the words, not the specifics of conversation, just the sound of it. A low, persistent roar of human activity rising and falling. Laughter, the occasional louder voice. At one point a burst of music, a lute or harp being played somewhere in the hall, the scrape and clatter of plates being moved. It's strange, hearing a party from outside it. You've heard this before, the sound of the castle feasting while you're working. But tonight it's different, because tonight you know the exact contents of every dish up there. You know the beef was on the spit for 4 hours, and Thomas adjusted the temperature twice. You know the civvy sauce is excellent, not because you made it, but because you smelled it develop through the afternoon. You know Edmund is going to be annoyed that the upper tables got the good bread while the lower tables got the trenchers, because Edmund has professional pride and considers this a commentary on his abilities rather than a logistical necessity. The dishes come back down. This is the part that nobody who hasn't worked in a feast kitchen understands. The dishes come back. The emptied platters, the bowls licked clean or nearly so, the bones and the bread crusts and the untouched portions that weren't to someone's taste. All of it comes back down the passage and piles up in the kitchen to be washed and sorted, and what can be eaten will be eaten by the people who made it. You eat standing up. You always eat standing up in this kitchen, because there's nowhere to sit except the floor, and the floor is not where you eat if you have any choice about it. The beef is better than you expected. This is always the surprise. Knowing a dish's entire history doesn't diminish how it tastes. It actually makes it better, because you understand what went into making it this way instead of a worse way. The pottage is extraordinary. The almond milk and the ginger and the careful seasoning you added have produced something silky and rich and subtly complex. You eat 2 bowls of it. Robert eats 3. Thomas eats without sitting down, standing over the preparation table, picking at things from each of the returned dishes, tasting, evaluating, doing a post-mortem on the meal while it's still warm. "The sauce," he says, mostly to himself. "What about it?" Edmund asks. "Could have had more pepper," he pauses. "But not much more. It was good." Edmund makes a sound that indicates he agrees with this assessment, but doesn't want to give Thomas the satisfaction of saying so. Hugh has sat down on a stool near the cooling bread oven. His whole body has the posture of someone who has been vertical for 12 hours and is deeply grateful for the opportunity to be horizontal. He's eating chicken. He looks peaceful in the way that very tired people look peaceful. "Hugh," Thomas says. "Sir, you did well today." Hugh looks up. This surprises him. Thomas doesn't often say things like this. "Thank you, sir." Thomas nods and goes back to his food. The kitchen gradually quiets. The fires burn lower now. Nobody feeding them urgently, just maintaining warmth. The light from them is gentler than it's been all day, orange rather than white, the light of fire settling toward sleep. Outside, in the great hall, the feast continues. They'll be up there for hours. The important people always feast long. There will be more wine, more music. There might be a minstrel. There might be entertainment of some kind. Down here in the kitchen, you finish your meal and begin the first wash. It's late when the rider arrives. You know something has happened because of the sound. Hoofbeats in the courtyard, which is not unusual. Riders come and go. But then voices. Urgent voices. The kind of voices that are trying to convey something important fast. which gives them a specific quality, a thinness, an edge. Then the steward comes through the kitchen. He doesn't usually come through the kitchen at this hour. He doesn't usually look like this either, his normal smoothness displaced by something underneath that looks like the early stages of fear. "What is it?" Thomas asks, because Thomas has no patience for the etiquette of not asking. The steward pauses. He looks at Thomas and then around the kitchen and then back at Thomas. "A rider from Dover," he says. "News from the ports." He hesitates. "And you've known this man your whole time here, his particular relationship with bad information, his tendency to manage it rather than relay it. And this hesitation is different from the management hesitation. This is the hesitation of someone who hasn't processed what they're saying yet. There is sickness," he says, "in the ships from the continent, something in Weymouth, something in Bristol, something coming up from the south." The kitchen is very quiet. Thomas is looking at the steward with an expression you can't fully read. "What kind of sickness?" Thomas asks. The steward says a word you've heard before, distantly, in the way that terrible things come to you before they come to you. In rumour, in the half-heard conversations of travellers, in the reports that have been filtering up from the coast for the past month. A word from the Italian, pestilenza, the pestilence, the plague. "It's in France," the steward says. "It was in France last year, and now the ships are carrying it." Thomas stands very still. You have never seen Thomas stand completely still before. He is always in motion, always tending to something, always half turned toward the next task. This stillness is wrong. "The Lord knows," the steward says. "He'll address the household in the morning." He looks round the kitchen one more time as if he's counting something. "Finish what you're doing. Go to sleep." He leaves. Nobody in the kitchen speaks for a long moment. The fires crackle. Log shifts. This spit, no longer loaded, turns once slowly in its brackets and stops. "What does it mean?" Robert asks. He's too young to know what it means. He's asking honestly. You and Thomas and Edmund and Hugh all know what it means to varying degrees. You know from talk, from rumour, from the way adults have been speaking about the continent for the past year, in the specific lowered tones they use for things they don't want to say out loud in front of children. Sickness that comes from the ships. That moves from person to person. That in France, in Italy, in places you've heard of but never seen, has been doing something to the population that nobody has a word for, because the word hasn't been needed before in living memory on this scale. It means, Thomas says carefully, that we'll be cooking more meals here for a while, because people will be staying put rather than travelling. This is the information shaped into something manageable, something a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old can receive without the larger horror that is implicit in it. You appreciate this about Thomas suddenly and specifically. He can hold enormous things and give you the portion you can carry. "Go to sleep," Thomas says, "all of you." You don't go to sleep immediately. You sit near the bread ovens as you do every night, on your pallet, in the warmth that the stone holds long after the fire inside it has died down. The stone remembers heat. You've thought about this before, in the way you think about things late at night when you're too tired to stop thinking, but too tired to think about anything complicated. The stone remembers heat. It was hot for a long time, and now it's cooling, and it will be cold by morning, and tomorrow night you'll make it hot again. Cycles. The kitchen is full of small sounds. The settling of the fires, the slow tick of the stone walls cooling. Robert's breathing from his pallet near the wall, already deep and steady. He falls asleep fast the way. Children do, without the delay that comes later in life when the day follows you to bed. Thomas the Lesser is asleep too, across the room, one arm flung out. Hugh left immediately after eating, gone to the room he shares with two of the stable hands, exhausted all the way down to his bones. Edmund stayed longer, cleaning his work area with the methodical care he brings to everything, setting out the starter culture for tomorrow's bread, covering the flour sacks against mice. Now it's just you, and the dying fires, and the stone walls of the kitchen. You think about the rider, about the word the steward used, about France, which you've never seen, and about the ships coming from France, and about what comes with them. You know something about sickness. Everyone in this castle knows something about sickness, because this is a century in which knowing about sickness is less about medicine and more about frequency. Your father died of a fever when you were 10. The fever came in winter. It lasted 3 weeks, and then he was gone. Fairly simple as deaths go. The priest came, the last rites were administered, the grave was dug in the churchyard of Attercroft's small church. Straightforward. What the steward described doesn't sound straightforward. What you've heard described in the conversations of travellers stopping at the castle gate, in the priest's sermons that have been increasingly about plagues and God's judgment, in the letter that arrived last month from the Lord's correspondent in London, doesn't sound like your father's fever. It sounds like something else. Something without a clear shape yet, arriving from the south like weather, like the particular feeling you get when the sky changes before a storm, when the light goes wrong and the animals get restless and you just know that something large is coming. You're 14 years old. You've been in this castle for 3 years. You've learned to cook, or the beginning of cooking. You've learned to manage fires, which is not nothing. You've learned the social topography of a household, its hierarchies and its kindnesses and its cruelties, and where you fit within it. You don't know what's coming. Nobody does. But you're here in the warm kitchen, and you're fed, and tomorrow there will be more work, and the work will be familiar enough to hold you. That's something. Outside in the courtyard you can hear, barely distantly, the sounds of 200 men and their horses settling for the night. The snort of a horse, a door closing, a guard calling something to another guard on the far wall. The castle breathes around you, slowly, the way large stone things breathe. You pull the rough wool blanket over your shoulders and stare at the ceiling, which you know every inch of by now. The particular stain from a grease fire 2 years ago. The crack in the stone that runs from the east window toward the central smoke hole. The hooks where the smoked meats hang in. Winter and the herb bundles hang in summer. This is your ceiling. This is your room. This is the closest thing you have right now to home. Time in a working kitchen doesn't have the kind of dramatic shape that things have in stories. It doesn't build to clear climaxes and resolve neatly. It accumulates. Days that are all similar and all different. The slight variations that make each day its own thing. The Monday when you burnt the peas because a child's voice in the courtyard distracted you for 30 seconds at exactly the wrong moment, and the smell of burnt peas is specific and unmistakable. And Thomas said nothing, just looked, which was worse than anything he could have said. The Thursday when Edmund made a bread so good, lighter than usual, the crust thinner and more crackling, the interior with a small, perfect, even structure, that Thomas cut himself a piece in the middle of the day and ate it standing at the table, which is the only compliment Edmund has ever told. You he values. Walter comes back after 2 weeks. His hand healed mostly, though the skin over the burn site is pinker than the surrounding skin and probably will be for years. He works more carefully around the pots now. Not fearfully. Carefully. There's a difference. Fear makes you inefficient. Care makes you better. The arrival of Sir Robert Morley and his 200 men was, it turns out, not the largest test of this kitchen's capacity. That comes 6 weeks later, when Lord Geoffrey throws a Christmas feast that requires 3 days of preparation and involves, at its peak, 12 hearths burning simultaneously in an expanded temporary kitchen set up in the outer courtyard. You manage all 12 fires, Thomas notices. He doesn't say anything specific. But at some point during the second day of the Christmas preparation, when the outer kitchen is running in addition to the main kitchen, and you're making your circuit between them, he falls into step beside you for a moment, watching what you're doing. The corner hearth, he says, pointing, burning too hot on the left side, wood's uneven. You look. He's right. You adjust. He walks away. But he was watching you work, and he made a correction, not a criticism. There's a difference there too. The body in a working kitchen is a specific instrument. After 3 years, you've mapped yours the way a sailor maps a coastline. The reliable parts, the weak points, the places where damage accumulates. Your shoulders are stronger than they've ever been from the water carrying and the wood handling, but the right one has a specific complaint that appears after heavy carrying and takes 2 days to fully resolve. Your hands are roughened beyond what they'd be otherwise. The knuckles always slightly cracked in cold weather, the palms calloused in specific places that correspond to the tools you use most. Your fingernails are permanently edged with ash. Your sense of smell has changed. This sounds strange, but it's true. Working in an environment saturated with complex smells has sharpened the discrimination of it. You can distinguish not just what something is, but how far along it is. Whether the garlic is starting to burn or just browning, whether the bread is 3 minutes from done or 7 minutes from done, whether the meat at the back of the cold store is turning or just smelling of cold. Thomas says this is how cooks are born. Not by learning recipes, but by learning to smell. A recipe tells you what to do, he said once, early in the winter when it was quiet enough to talk. Your nose tells you what's happening. You need both. Most people have one. Your hands have also developed the temperature reading sense he showed you. You can hold your hand near a fire and know, within a reasonable range, how hot it is, which is a more useful piece of information than knowing a number. The senses are trained. They're tools. You're building them the way you'd build any skill, through repetition, through mistakes, through the kind of attention that only comes from necessity. The physical cost is also real and cumulative. Your feet at the end of a feast day feel as though the soles have been replaced with something made of lead. Not painful exactly. Past a certain point, pain becomes a kind of information you stop processing in detail. Just heavy and present and insistent. You know, now, why the older kitchen workers have the specific way of walking they have, slightly wide-legged, slightly forward-leaning, as if compensating for a weight that isn't there except that it sort of is. The accumulated weight of years of flagstone floors. Your back. You're 14, and your back is occasionally a problem, which is early for that particular complaint. But the combination of fire tending, bending, crouching, straightening repeatedly, and water carrying, the specific pressure of a heavy bucket on the angle of your pelvis, has produced a tension in the lower back that presents in the morning as reluctance to be vertical. You've learned that moving fast when you get up is better than moving slow. The muscles warm quickly with use, and the discomfort fades, but if you stand still it builds. You don't talk about any of this. Nobody in the kitchen talks about physical discomfort except in the context of injury that requires attention. The burns are talked about because burns require action. The tiredness is not talked about because tiredness is just the state of being here. It's fine. It's all fine. This is what fine looks like in this century. One evening, late January, the castle quiet, Sir Robert Morley and his men long departed south. Thomas opens the spice chest. He does this sometimes when the kitchen is quiet and the day's work is done. He'll open the chest and do a mental inventory, not for practical reasons, but for the pleasure of it. The way some people count money not because they need to, but because the counting itself is satisfying. Tonight he lets you stand nearby while he does it. The smells are extraordinary up close. Not one smell, but a collection of them, each distinct, each carrying what feels like an entire geography. Pepper, Thomas says, lifting a small cloth bag. From India? Or that's where they tell me it comes from. I've never met anyone who's been to India, but the pepper comes from somewhere very far away, across water I can't imagine. He sets it down, picks up another. Ginger. Same. Somewhere in the east. The dried root ground to powder. Fresh is better, but you can't get fresh here. By the time it arrives, it has been travelling for months. Another. Cinnamon. The bark of a tree, if you can believe it. Someone, somewhere, peels the bark from a tree and dries it and grinds it, and then it travels for 6 months and ends up in this chest. He looks at the interior of the chest with something you'd describe as reverence if you were being dramatic about it. Or maybe just serious. Respect. Each of these, he says, passed through a dozen hands before it came to me. A farmer in some country neither of us will ever see, a merchant in a port city, a ship, another merchant, another ship, and then a merchant in London who sells to this household. He closes the chest, locks it. Every time you use this, he says, gesturing at the chest, you're using something that half the world handled to get here. That's worth remembering. You think about this. About the pepper in a dish you've made 100 times, about the kitchen that made it, and the hands that grew it, and the ships that carried it, and the hands that sold it, and Thomas's hands that measured it, and your hands that stirred it. All of those people involved in every dish. It's a large thought for a cold January kitchen. You hold on to it. Spring in this castle comes first as a smell, before it comes as a sight. You notice it one morning in February, carrying water from the river. The air has a quality to it that winter air doesn't have, a freshness under the cold, a living note under the deadness of frozen things. The grass on the riverbank is still brown, but at the waterline there's a thin edge of green that wasn't there a week ago. Then the birds, more of them, more active. The sounds of the castle morning changing from the sparse winter soundscape to something denser. The kitchen benefits from spring in concrete ways. The stored provisions have been depleting since autumn, and by February the meals are simpler than they were. Fewer spices used more carefully, less variety, more dried fish and salted meat as the fresh options dwindle. Spring means new things starting. The kitchen garden on the south wall of the outer courtyard, which has been brown and dormant since November, begins to show green at the edges. Edmund sends you to check it in early March. What's up? He asks when you get back. Leeks, you tell him. Just coming, and the herb beds, the sage is coming back, thyme. He nods with satisfaction. Sage and thyme are the foundation of so much of this kitchen's work. The sauces, the pottages, the stuffings. When they're coming in fresh rather than dried, Everything tastes different. What about the parsley? Not yet. Give it 2 weeks. You give it 2 weeks, and he's right. The parsley comes up in the 2nd week of March, in a dense, flat-leafed cluster that smells extraordinary when you pull a handful of it, clean and sharp and green. You bring it inside, and Thomas takes it from you and crushes a leaf between his fingers and smells his fingers, and his face does something complicated. Something that looks like pleasure, but also like memory. The pleasure of something familiar returning. About time, he says. The news from the south arrives in pieces the way bad weather moves. First it was the rider in November. Sickness in the ports, sickness on the ships from the continent. Then in January, a travelling merchant who stopped at the castle gate for water mentioned that there was trouble in Dorset, that a village south of Dorchester had lost 1/3 of its people in December. 1/3! Thomas, when you told him this, said nothing. He was at the preparation table. He kept working. In February there was a letter from London to the Lord that you didn't read because you can't read, but you heard it described. A friend of Lord Jeffreys, a merchant of some kind, writing about conditions in the capital. Apparently things were unusual. Apparently people were afraid. Apparently a physician had said something about the character of the illness that was making rounds in the households near the wharves. In March, a priest came through, a wandering friar, one of the Franciscans, who stopped and was given a meal and a night's lodging in the outer buildings, and who spoke to the castle chaplain in the chapel for an hour. The chaplain told the steward something after. The steward's face changed. You don't know the specific contents of these conversations. You're a kitchen boy. Information doesn't flow to kitchen boys. It flows around them, above them, past them, and sometimes some of it falls low enough that you can catch it. What you catch in March is this. The thing moving up from the south is not slowing down. Thomas calls the kitchen together one morning. Unusual, he doesn't gather people for addresses. He addresses them individually or as he passes, and stands at the preparation table and says, I don't know what's coming, but this castle has good walls and good stores. We know how to keep people fed. That's what we do. We keep doing it. He looks at each face in turn. If anyone has family nearby, parents, brothers, sisters, now is the time to tell me, and I'll arrange for them to come here. Inside the walls. He pauses. Lord Jeffrey has said, whoever needs shelter, the castle is open. This is generous. This is the function of a castle that people sometimes forget. Not just military, not just administrative, but the centre of the community, the place of refuge, the high walls with food inside them. Your mother is in Attercroft, your uncle and his family. The village of Attercroft, you say. You don't usually interrupt Thomas, but this feels like an exception. He looks at you. How many? My mother, my uncle's family, 4 children. I'll send word, he says. He means it. This is something you know about Thomas. Underneath the temper and the demands and the relentless professional standards, he means what he says. He said he'd send word to Attercroft, and Ryder will go to Attercroft, and your mother will receive an invitation to come inside the walls. Whether she'll come is a different question. She arrives on a Tuesday in late April, walking with your Uncle John and his wife Margaret and 4 children ranging from 5 to 12. They've walked from Attercroft, which is about 6 miles, and they arrive at the castle gate dusty and tired and carrying everything they own in bundles and bags. You're in the kitchen when the gate guard sends word. You drop the pot you're carrying, set it down, not drop it, that's a habit you've built, and go to the courtyard. Your mother is smaller than you remember. This is the strange thing about returning to something after a time of change. The thing itself hasn't changed, but you have, and so the proportions are different. She is exactly the height she's always been. Your mother, and you have grown 3 inches since she sent you away, and so she is now below your eye level, in a way she wasn't before. She looks at you and she goes very still. The same stillness Thomas had with the steward's news, but different. The stillness of someone experiencing something they prepared for and still didn't prepare for enough. William, she says. She says it like she's checking, making sure it's you. It's me, you say, which is a foolish thing to say. But the first thing you say after a long absence is always slightly foolish. She hugs you. She's thin, your mother. She was always thin. The farm is hard work with insufficient food, and this has been true her whole life. But she hugs you like someone who hasn't let go of something in a long time and doesn't intend to let go now. You let her. Your Uncle John is behind her, looking around the castle courtyard with the evaluating eye of a farmer assessing a new field. He nods at you. You've grown, he says. A bit, you say. They feed you here? Yes. Well then, he says, and this seems to settle something for him, the essential question of whether coming here was the right decision. You bring them to the kitchen, not the main kitchen. There's a smaller building near the outer wall where the additional household people sleep, and Thomas has arranged spaces there for your family and for the 3 other groups of relatives who've arrived from the surrounding countryside. Thomas is in the doorway when you bring your mother through, the kitchen courtyard. He looks at her. She looks at him. This is Thomas, you say. He's the head cook. He runs the kitchen. My son speaks well of you, your mother says. Thomas looks at you. Something in his face flickers. He doesn't speak at all, he says, but he works hard enough. Your mother laughs. It's the first time you've heard her laugh in 3 years, and it sounds exactly the same as it always did, and this is one of the better moments of your life so far. The castle closes its gates in early May. Not absolutely, not permanently. This isn't a siege. There's no army at the walls. But Lord Geoffrey, advised by the physician who's been brought in from the nearest town, has decided that the best course of action is to limit who comes and goes, to keep the household population stable, to not introduce new people who might carry something. The phrase people are using, when they use it at all, is avoiding the pestilence, as if it's something you can walk around if you choose your route carefully. You don't know if this works. Nobody knows if this works. The physicians have theories. Bad air, imbalanced humours, miasma rising from low ground, and the priests have theories involving sin and divine punishment, and the practical tradespeople like Thomas have a more straightforward theory, which is stay away from sick people and hope for the best. The kitchen continues. This is what you think about sometimes, in the quiet moments, the way the kitchen continues. People outside are dying. The South is in something that everyone is now calling by the name that nobody wanted to use before, the Black Death. A name coined in hindsight but already in use as the thing spread from port to interior, city to village. And inside this kitchen, in this castle, the fires are lit every morning, and the bread is made and the meals go up the passage and come back down, and are eaten by the people who made them. The continuity of it, the insistence of ordinary, things in the middle of extraordinary ones. 2 of the castle servants fell sick in June, a laundress and one of the stable hands. They are isolated immediately, put in a room in the outer buildings with their own water supply and meals left at the door. The physician attended them. Thomas increased the amount of food coming from the kitchen by 2 portions. You made those 2 portions. You made them thinking about the 2 people eating them. The laundress named Edith, who you'd exchanged 3 words with in 3 years. The stable hand whose name you didn't know. Edith recovered. The stable hand did not. Thomas told the kitchen this in the same flat voice he used for everything. Not without feeling, but the feeling compressed, contained. John from the stables died this morning, he said. He'll be buried this afternoon in the churchyard. He looked at each face. Anyone who wants to attend the afternoon work will be covered. Nobody went, not because of coldness, but because the physician had recommended against gatherings. Because everyone was afraid in the specific way that being afraid in a confined space teaches you to be afraid quietly. The fires continued. November again. A full year since that first feast, the desperate scramble, with 200 men and 8 rabbits and 3 cows from the home farm. Lord Geoffrey marks All Saints' Day with a feast, not as grand as Christmas, but significant. The household gathers in the great hall. The news from outside, filtered and managed and terrible, is briefly put aside in favour of candles and food, and the particular determination of people to mark the things worth marking, even when the world outside is falling apart. You've been working toward this feast for 3 days. You've also, over the course of the past year, become something different in this kitchen than you were. You can see it in the small things. Thomas now sends you to do tasks alone that he would have supervised a year ago. He asks your opinion occasionally on questions of seasoning, temperature, timing. When he's working on a new preparation, something he's attempting that he hasn't made in a while, he sometimes narrates it to you rather than to the air. You don't know what to call this. It's not friendship. The distance between head cook and scullion doesn't collapse into friendship. It's more like recognition. He sees you working and he knows what he's seeing. He sees someone who's paying attention for the right reasons. This feast, you're managing the sauce work while Thomas focuses on the roasting. This is new. 3 days ago, Thomas said, "The Lombard sauce for the capon, you know it." And you said you knew it, and he said, "Then make it," and went to the main hearth. The Lombard sauce is a sweet-sour preparation, a reduction of verjuice and wine sweetened with honey and coloured with saffron, with ginger, and a careful amount of cinnamon and ground almonds thickening it at the end. It's a complex sauce. There are many places in its preparation where a mistake changes its character irrevocably. You make it. You make the initial reduction too fast and catch it just before it tips from concentrated to burnt, adjusting the heat immediately, pulling the pot back from the direct flame. You add the honey at the right moment, after the acid has reduced enough that the sweetness doesn't compete with the sourness, so they reinforce each other. You add the saffron, a tiny, tiny pinch, saffron being worth its weight in almost anything, and the sauce turns the particular deep gold that means it's working. The almonds go in last, ground fine, stirred through the warm liquid until they dissolve into a silkiness that thickens the whole thing. You taste it. It's good. You taste it again, because you want to be sure, and because tasting something twice is honest when you've made it yourself. It's very good. Thomas comes over. He has the tasting spoon before you've offered it to him. He takes his taste. He turns to you. "More verjuice," he says. You open your mouth to argue, then close it. You add more verjuice. He tastes again, nods. "Yes," he says, and he goes back to the hearth. "Yes." That's the whole thing. One word. You stand there holding the tasting spoon and you understand completely that yes from Thomas is a different word than yes from anyone else. Yes from Thomas is the condensed evaluation of 17 years of working with food and the decade before that of learning how to work with food, and it's been applied to this sauce that you made, and it means that the sauce is what it should be. You put the spoon down, you go back to the fire, late November, cold, the breath visible in the morning cold, the breaking ice in the basin cold. You're on your second year in this kitchen. You know the fires the way you know breathing. You know the bread by smell, the meat by touch, the sauces by colour and texture, and the particular way they catch the light when they're done. You know that a kitchen is not a place where you are invisible, even when you feel invisible. You are the person managing the heat on which everything depends, and without heat nothing is food. Without the fires you tend, the bread doesn't bake, the meat doesn't cook, the sauces don't reduce. The invisibility is a misunderstanding of the architecture of things. You know that craft lives in the body before it lives in the mind, that Thomas's hands know the dough before Thomas's head has articulated what the dough needs, that Edmund's ears hear the bread before he opens the oven, that Hugh's skin reads the fire with a precision that no description fully captures. You know that a meal is an act of history. Every spice has travelled. Every technique was learned from someone who learned it from someone else. A chain of transmission going back further than anyone can trace. To the first person who understood that meat changes in fire and changes good. You know that the people who eat the food and the people who make the food are both necessary and both real, even when one group doesn't always see the other. You know that a castle is a community, and a community is its people, and its people need feeding, and feeding people is not a small thing regardless of how small it looks. January, the 2nd January, the worst month in the kitchen, the month when everything is at its most depleted, and the days are shortest, and the cold is most present, and the work is least varied. Thomas has begun, recently, to teach you things directly. Not the casual narration of the work, not the correction as you go. Direct instruction. He sits down at the preparation table at the end of the day sometimes after the others have gone and talks about the history of dishes, about where techniques come from, about the logic underneath the recipes, why certain combinations work and others don't, what the underlying principles are that let you adapt when you don't have exactly the right ingredient. You could be a cook, he says one evening. You don't say anything. Not tomorrow, not in 2 years, but eventually. He's turning one of Edmund's leftover bread rolls in his hands, not eating it, just doing something with his hands the way he always has to be doing something. You have the sense for it, the smell, the touch. More importantly, you pay attention. Most people don't pay attention. I've been paying attention for 3 years, you say. I know. He sets down the bread. I noticed. A pause. The fire's low, the kitchen cooling, the world outside dark and cold and continuing. What happens, you ask, when an apprentice finishes? What comes after? Journeyman, Thomas says. You work for wages. You can go to other kitchens, other households. You build a reputation, and then, if you're good enough, you get your own kitchen. Your own kitchen, you repeat. Your own kitchen, he confirms. A household that trusts you to run it. Your own apprentices, he looks at you. Your own locked chest. The spice chest. The key on the cord around his neck. The daily ritual of measuring out something worth more than wood. You think about this for a moment. How long until journeyman? 2 more years, he says. Maybe less the way you're going. 2 more years. You can work with 2 more years. There is a place on the east wall of the castle, the outer curtain wall, the lower section where the wall walk is accessible, where on clear days you can see, if you look east, a very long way. You go there sometimes on Sunday mornings. The view from the castle walls is different from the view inside the castle. Inside you see stone and sky, and the limited rectangle of the inner courtyard. From the walls the world opens out, the valley with the river running through it, the fields, bare now in January, but you know what they look like in summer, the green and gold of crops, the slower green of the meadows, the village of a place called Hartley visible as a cluster of rooftops in the middle distance, the woods beyond that, the hills beyond the woods, England in winter. Grey sky, brown earth, naked trees. It's not beautiful the way that words like beauty usually apply to things. It's not dramatic. It's not the kind of view that makes you want to write poetry about it. And even if it were, you couldn't write poetry because you can't write at all. But it's large. That's what you come here for. The largeness. The kitchen is a confined, intense, purposeful place, and the largeness of the outside world is a corrective to that confinement. You can spend a whole week with your horizon limited to the distance between the main hearth and the preparation table, and forget in a physical way that the world has more dimensions. The view from the wall restores the dimensions. Out there, somewhere to the south, the pestilence is doing what it's doing. The reports that come in are bad when they come in. The physician tells Lord Geoffrey tells the steward tells Thomas selectively, Thomas tells you selectively. The picture that assembles from these filtered reports is incomplete, but sufficient to be frightening. But from here, from the wall, you can see the river, running the same way it always runs, the same water from the same hills going to the same sea, birds on the bare branches of the trees below the wall, a robin, a pair of doves, a crow doing what crows do, the smoke from the village hearths rising into the grey sky. Life continuing, not unchanged. You're not naive enough at 14 to think it's unchanged. People have died and will die, people you know and people you'll never know, and the world will be different for it, measurably different. But the river is still running, the bread will still be made tomorrow, the fires will still be lit before dawn, the ash cleared and the kindling laid, and the first heat of the day will still fill this kitchen with something that is, beneath all its complexity and difficulty and occasional beauty, fundamentally warmth. What 3 years in a medieval castle kitchen teaches you is not what you expected to learn when your uncle took you to the castle gate. You expected to learn cooking. You're learning cooking, but it's not the whole of it. You're learning that a kitchen is a model of a larger system, with its hierarchy and its specializations and its interdependencies. That the bread is not separate from the source, which is not separate from the fire, which is not separate from the wood, which is not separate from the forest and the men who work it. You're learning that expertise is physical before it's intellectual, that the knowledge lives in the hands and the nose and the skin, and that the mind's job is not to lead, but to organize what the body has already discovered. You're learning that a master's job, at its best, is to give the apprentice the opportunity to fail at small things in time to avoid failing at large things. Thomas shouts at you when you burn the peas because burning the peas is a small failure, and he would prefer you burn the peas now, at 14, when a pot of peas costs almost nothing, than to repeat the same inattention later when the stakes are higher. You're learning that authority and care are not opposites, that the harshest supervisor you've ever had also sent a rider to Attercroft to bring your mother inside the walls without you asking, just because you mentioned her. You're learning what food means, not what it tastes like. You knew that, but what it means, what it costs to make and what it costs to not make, what it means for it to be there at the end of a long day for the people who made it and for the people who depend on the people who made it. Thomas can't read, Edmund can't read, Hugh can't read, you can't read. Walter can read a little, enough to work through a letter slowly. None of this knowledge lives in writing, it lives in people. In the chain of transmission from master to apprentice, hand to hand, generation to generation. If any of them die, if Thomas dies, which is possible, which is a thought you've started to be unable to suppress, some part of what they carry dies with them, partly, but not wholly, because you're here. And Robert, who is 10 now and taller and less sniffy than he was at 9, is here. And Thomas the Lesser, who has developed in the past year into someone who works with actual competence, is here. The knowledge transfers. Imperfectly. Incompletely. But it transfers. That's enough. That's always has to be enough. April again. 2 springs. The castle has survived the winter. The news from outside has continued to be bad and then very bad, and then slightly less bad in the way that catastrophes eventually plateau, not because they stop, but because they run out of new ground. The pestilence has taken, in the estimates of the people who are trying to track such things, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population of England. Those numbers don't fit in your head properly. You can count to 200, to 1,000 if you work at it. 1/3 of England is a number with no shape in your mind, just a sound. Attercroft lost half its people. Your Uncle John's wife Margaret died in February. 2 of his 4 children survived. Your mother, sitting in the room near the outer kitchen where she's been since last spring, is alive and keeping herself busy helping in the lesser kitchen and in the garden. You check on her every morning before the kitchen work begins. You bring her bread from the first bake. She takes it and holds it and says something about whether it's heavier than last week's or lighter than last Tuesday's, as if the weight of a loaf is information about how you're doing. You think it is, actually. You think she's reading the bread the way Thomas reads a sauce, the heaviness or lightness of it, the crust's thickness, the specific golden brown that means you controlled the oven perfectly. She's reading you through the bread. You let her. One morning she says, "You're becoming a cook." It's not a question. "I'm becoming a cook," you confirm. She looks at the bread in her hands. She looks at you. "Your father would have liked to see that," she says. "He always had a good eye for food. He could tell you what was in a dish just from the smell." You think, of course he could. Of course that's where it comes from. "I didn't know that," you say. "You were young," she says. "You don't remember everything." She tears off a piece of the bread and eats it. Her face does the thing faces do when bread is right. Not a big reaction, just a slight relaxation, a satisfaction that isn't performed. "Good bread," she says. "Edmund made it." "But you knew it was good." "Yes." "That's the same thing," she says, or near enough. Late spring. The kitchen smells of fresh herbs from the garden, the first season's parsley and sage, mixing with the wood smoke that never fully leaves, giving the familiar smell a green edge that means something is starting again. Thomas is at the preparation table, doing the thing he does at the end of a day, the post-work inventory, checking the stores, making the mental notes that will translate into tomorrow's preparation. His hands are at rest for once, just resting on the table, flat, palm down. You're banking the evening fires. This is the last act. You bring each hearth down to a careful bank, not extinguished, because you'll need them tomorrow morning, and it's easier to build from a live coal than from cold ash. Just managed. Reduced to a slow, stable burn that will hold overnight. You do the main hearth first. The big one, the Spitfire. You rake the coals toward the centre, build the ash back around the edges, place 2 large oak logs in a V configuration that will burn slowly through the night. The heat comes off it still, reduced now to something pleasant rather than overpowering, the warmth of an ending rather than a beginning. You do the bread hearth, the pottage hearth, the back hearth where the sauces live. Each one, settle, arrange, leave. The kitchen comes to a lower temperature as the fires come down. The sounds change. The active crackle of working fires gives way to something quieter, the occasional pop of contracting wood, the soft collapse of an ash bed. Edmund is already gone. Hugh is gone. Robert and Thomas the Lesser are gone. Just you and Thomas. Tomorrow, Thomas says without looking up. Sir? Tomorrow I want you on the pottage start, full supervision. From the beginning, you decide the seasoning. You wait. I'll be there, he says, but I won't tell you what to do unless you do something dangerous. Full supervision, beginning to end. Your decisions. Yes, sir, you say. Don't make the face. You weren't making a face. You are making whatever expression happens when something you've been working toward for a long time comes a step closer. Yes, sir, you say again. He stands up. His knees are bothering him. They have been since February, the cold getting into them, the years of stone floors asserting themselves. He doesn't mention it. He stands up with the same deliberate steadiness he brings to everything. He walks to the kitchen door. Stops. You won't get it right the first time, he says. That's fine. Getting it wrong in front of me is better than getting it wrong later. He goes. You stand in the banking kitchen with the low fires and the smell of the day's work still thick in the air, and you feel something that takes a moment to name. Not pride exactly, not happiness exactly. Something underneath both of those. The feeling of a day that was fully lived and fully spent. The feeling of having been exactly where you were supposed to be, doing exactly what you were supposed to do, with the specific weight and heat and smell of it all still on your hands and your clothes and your skin. You're 15 years old. You've been in this kitchen for 4 years. You know the fires. You're learning the food. Somewhere ahead, visible now in the way that distant things become visible when you've been climbing long enough, is a kitchen that might be yours. Not yet, but eventually. That's enough. That's always been enough. Outside, the castle settles into night. The watchman calls his first circuit. The horses in the stables shift and settle. The river runs in the valley below, cold and dark and continuous. In the morning you'll wake before dawn. You'll clear the ash. You'll lay the kindling. You'll coax the first fire of the day from the coals that have been keeping themselves alive through the night. And then the kitchen will wake up, and the work will begin, and the bread will go in the oven, and the pottage will go on the fire, and the castle will eat, and the castle will continue, as it did yesterday, as it will tomorrow, as it has, in one form or another, since someone first understood that fire changes things, and changes good, and that making food for other people is not a small act regardless of how small it looks from above. Somewhere in the stacked centuries between that kitchen and the world you're listening from now, Every fireplace that held a cooking fire, every kitchen that fed a household through a hard winter, every cook who handed knowledge to an apprentice in the only way knowledge survived, by demonstration, by repetition, by the patient insistence of doing the thing again until the thing becomes part of you, all of it connects. The fires have been burning a long time. They're still burning. The Black Death reached England in 1348 and killed approximately half the English population by 1350. The resulting labour shortage fundamentally altered the feudal system, accelerating the decline of serfdom and changing the social structure of medieval England permanently. The castle kitchens of this period were the first professional kitchens operating under hierarchies and techniques that would eventually evolve into the brigade system of classical European cooking. Many of the spices mentioned here, pepper, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, remained luxury goods until the 16th century's age of exploration changed the supply routes. Saffron used in the Lombard sauce remains the world's most expensive spice by weight,